Welcome back to the Revenge Tales. Let me tell you exactly what happened, because I still think about the look on their faces when the cashier read out $1,050. And I simply smiled and said I needed to step outside for a moment. What they never understood was that walking away from that register was not my revenge. It was only the first domino. My name is Adriana Shaw, and I have been married to Marcus for 4 years. That afternoon, I was at an upscale specialty market downtown with my mother-in-law, Eleanor, and my sister-in-law, Peyton, a place that sold imported groceries alongside a small curated section of kitchenware and home goods. The kind of store where a single visit could easily run past $1,000 if you let it. I already had a knot forming in my stomach the second we walked through those doors, because I had seen this exact scene play out more times than I could count. Eleanor pushed the cart straight toward the imported section without glancing at price tags, and Peyton started loading in Wagyu beef, truffles, and caviar. Eleanor wandered into the home goods aisle and added a $150 face serum, a $400 blender, and a set of copper cookware worth another $500. I finally asked quietly if they had brought enough money for all of it, and Eleanor turned on me with a look sharp enough to cut glass, asking if I was implying the family was broke. Peyton just laughed and said, "Do not worry, sis. That is exactly what your bank salary is for." That single sentence told me everything I needed to know, that this entire trip had been planned around me paying. At the register, the total came to $1,050, and I heard people in line actually gasp. I crossed my arms and waited. Eleanor patted her purse and announced she had left her cash at home, and Peyton immediately backed her up. I looked the cashier in the eye, asked her to hold the transaction, and told Eleanor I needed to step outside. She frowned and told me to just pay first and deal with it later. I turned around and walked out without looking back. Even when I heard Peyton calling my name behind me, I want to be honest with you, that walkout felt good, but it was not the ending. It was only the moment I finally admitted to myself how bad things actually were. Weeks after my wedding, Eleanor had called me into her kitchen and explained that the family kept a joint household fund. And since I worked, my paycheck needed to go directly into it so she could manage everything properly. When I asked what my portion should be, she told me to hand over my pay stubs so she could decide. I gave nearly my entire salary that first month, and Marcus, standing right there, only ever said one thing: "Just listen to Mom, she is great with finances." Over time, I learned that fund had zero transparency. When I asked for money for a certification course, Eleanor sighed and told me a married woman did not need more studying. Meanwhile, Peyton, who had not worked in years, came home constantly with designer bags worth more than my monthly contribution. I told Marcus everything, and every single time he told me not to make it a big drama, that his mother was just old-fashioned, that I needed to keep the peace. I heard that phrase, "that is just how she is," so many times I wanted to scream. So instead of arguing, I started keeping quiet records. Every forgotten wallet, every dinner I covered, every promise to pay me back that never arrived. The night of the grocery store, I did not answer Eleanor or Peyton, and I did not answer Marcus either when he called sounding completely unbothered, asking if we were done shopping yet. I told him to get to that store himself and handle it. 10 minutes later, he called back frantic, saying his mother felt humiliated in front of strangers filming on their phones, and when he tried the same old trick, telling me to just send him the money and sort it out later. I said no, because later always meant me quietly eating the cost while everyone moved on. When Marcus came home furious that evening, I did not argue. I set 4 years of printed bank statements on the coffee table and told him to look before we talked. This was the first crack. As he flipped through the pages, his face changed, because the total circled in red came to over $60,000, money that had paid for the very furniture we were sitting on. He went quiet for a long time, and I could see him doing math he had never once let himself do before. Before he could fully process it, Eleanor stormed in, and I connected my banking app to the television, pulling up a $15,000 transfer to Peyton that Eleanor had never mentioned to her own son. Marcus turned on his sister, and when she admitted she had wanted to fund a business with no paperwork, no plan, and no intention of ever telling him, something in his expression genuinely broke for the first time in 4 years. That was the second crack, but he still was not ready to fully see it. For 2 freezing days afterward, the house felt like a war zone with no shouting, only cold stares and comments dropped just loud enough for me to hear. Marcus kept saying he needed time to think, that this was still his family. And some small part of me understood that 4 years of loyalty does not dissolve in a single evening, even when the evidence is sitting right in front of you. Then, on the third day, everything changed. Marcus had actually spent that quiet, tense weekend going back through his mother's old paperwork on his own, without telling me, quietly comparing the numbers Eleanor had always waved off as household expenses against what he remembered our actual bills costing. He found nothing conclusive that weekend, only a growing, uneasy suspicion he could not yet name, which meant that when the real evidence finally arrived, some small part of him was already prepared to believe it instead of dismissing it outright. I noticed a strange charge on an old credit monitoring alert I barely remembered signing up for, a soft inquiry from a lender I did not recognize. I almost dismissed it as nothing, but something about it sat wrong with me all day, so I called a colleague in our bank's fraud department that evening, just to ask a quiet, off-the-record question. She went silent for a moment too long, then told me she needed to check something and would call me back. That call back took 4 agonizing hours, and I spent every minute of it replaying who could possibly have my documents. When she finally called, her voice was careful in a way that told me before her words did. There was a $25,000 personal loan application in my name, already pre-approved, moving toward final funding, and the digital signature was close enough to pass a casual glance, but not close enough to fool someone who had signed her own name 10,000 times. I sat frozen at my desk for a long moment, staring at the screen, trying to convince myself there was some innocent explanation, some clerical mix-up, before the truth settled over me like cold water. I realized immediately who had access to those documents, because Eleanor had insisted on locking all our important paperwork in her fireproof safe the moment I married into the family, telling me young people always lose things. That night I said nothing to anyone. I quietly requested certified copies of the application, and I waited, because I needed proof before I said a single word out loud in that house. When I finally confronted Eleanor with the file, she played the confused old woman card perfectly. But when I turned toward Peyton, her hand started shaking, because listed clearly on the guarantor line was her own name and her own social security number. I brought 2 bank fraud investigators into that house myself the following morning, and their signature comparison confirmed what I already suspected. This was not a misunderstanding. It was deliberate identity theft. Eleanor tried rallying half the extended family into our living room that afternoon, painting herself as the victim, until I played a recording I had saved months earlier of Peyton laughing that I would never dare make a scene. The room went completely silent. We drove to the bank's main branch the next day, where security footage clearly showed Peyton herself dropping off the fraudulent paperwork. Marcus stared at the screen, then at his sister, and this time there was no hesitation left in him at all. When the compliance officer warned that continued denial would trigger a formal referral to law enforcement, Peyton finally admitted she had signed it herself, calling it no big deal. Marcus did not defend her. He simply asked me quietly if that was truly all I had been to this family for 4 years, a signature they were free to borrow. Under the bank's fraud resolution process, Eleanor and Peyton were required to formally acknowledge responsibility for the loan and enter a structured repayment agreement with the lender, the kind of outcome that avoided a criminal referral only because I agreed not to press further once the bank confirmed my name was fully cleared. It was not a dramatic courtroom ending, but it was real, and it meant I would never spend one more day paying for a debt that was never mine. That night, I packed a suitcase while Marcus stood frozen in our bedroom doorway, apologizing over and over, promising he would finally set boundaries, finally protect me. I set divorce papers on the dresser next to an itemized spreadsheet of everything I had lost, and told him honestly that I had started preparing this the moment I understood loyalty to his mother would always come before loyalty to me, no matter how many times the evidence proved otherwise. I live alone now in a small, peaceful apartment, managing my own account, cooking whatever I want, answering to absolutely no one. The last time Marcus came by, he asked if I still loved him, and I told him honestly that love does not vanish overnight, but it also cannot survive on its own while you keep enduring the unendurable. Walking out of that grocery store was never the revenge. Refusing to keep protecting the people who forged my name onto the rest of my life. That was. If this story kept you here until the very last word, that is exactly what the Revenge Tales exist for. So hit subscribe right now, because next week's story is even more unbelievable, and you will not want to miss a single second of it.